I'm Marcia Lehman and I'm a Knox County Master Gardener. This video is part 2 of hot composting. I hope you've watched the first video which showed us building a bin, and now we're going to show you what to do as the bin starts to actually compost. So I can tell you that I started this bin on November the 10th. The ambient temperature was 52 degrees. So that means the pile, when I assembled it, was 52 degrees. The very next day, November 11th, it was 100 degrees. 2 days later, on the 13th, it was 140 degrees. And today, the 15th, it's at 145. Now, in the past, I would wait until the temperature starts to drop. But what happened to me last year was I'd get it to 145 and it would hang between 140 and 145 for up to 3 weeks. Well, 3 weeks from now, we're into December and it's cold, and you don't want to mess with water when it's cold outside. And the other is, you can notice this bin was made with welded wire that has 2-inch by 4-inch openings. It has it has already dropped 8 inches. So I've decided that this year, when it drops 8 inches, I'm going to turn it regardless of what the temperature is. And I'm hoping that the temperature will stay elevated. I expect the temperature to stay elevated. So let me take and put my tag over here in a safe, dry spot. Take my lid out. And unlike the hardware cloth in the first video, which I use zip ties, because these openings are bigger, I just use a piece of plastic coated wash line. I have 3 of them. One at the top, one at the bottom, one in the middle. And if I can find the end of it, there we go. And I'm just going to set these, well, I'll hold on to these for a moment. Here is the part that most people don't believe. When I take this cage off and protect my compost thermometer, I literally unwrap it and the pile stays standing. Most people do not believe this, so I'm showing you. The pile is standing. That allows me to bring my cage over here, right next to it, and I'm going to put it back together. The wire and the hardware cloth both like to coil up on you. Doesn't have to be real tight, just enough to hold it together. There's the bottom one. And there's the middle one. So there we go. I'm just going to set this bin right next to the pile. And you probably can't see this, so let me show you. The edge is a bit dry, but the center has started to break down nicely, and it's nice and moist. I was concerned that with as dry as the leaves are this year, I might have to add water. So I do have the water handy. But this is where I really do prefer the pitchfork. And our goal in turning is to get some of the drier stuff that's on the outside into the center, and to get some of the moister stuff on the outside. If you can do that, great. I don't always succeed at that. But we are not adding any more compost or any more coffee grounds at this stage. We are simply turning it primarily to get oxygen back in there for the microbes. So it is a bit dry, so I'm going to put it back in here to about a 4-inch layer, and then I am going to give it a bit of water. But it is starting to break down nicely already in just 5 days. Now, as I fork into it, yeah, I'm going to start breaking the pile apart, but The pile initially will stay standing all on its own. And this is where I do like the longer handle for reaching down in there. And I can tell you, I can feel the heat against my leg. You would not, at 145 degrees, you would not want to stick your hand into the middle of that. If you think about it, your hot water heater probably does not go above 120. And a lot of people, particularly with children, will set it at 105. So this is at 145. This is hotter than your sauna or your jacuzzi or your whirlpool. You do not want to stick your hand in there. And the heat does not come from the air temperature. It comes from all the microbial activity. So let me pause. Now, I'm not going to give it another 2 gallons. This is where you just need to exercise a little bit of judgment based on how dry it looks. If you were to grab a handful of it after it has cooled down a little bit, it should have about the texture of a moist sponge. You don't want to take that sponge and have water come running out of it. And at the same time, you don't want a dry sponge. You want a moist sponge. And again, I tend to put more water around the edge than in the center. Keep that handy. And if you get a big clump, just lift it higher and it'll fall apart when you drop it in. And if it doesn't break apart, just come in and break it apart. But I am pleased with how much this has broken down in the first 5 days. And even though it had sunk 8 inches, this process of turning on the first turn is probably going to refill the bin because we're putting air back in there. As you get to the second, third, fourth turns, it will not fill the bin because things will be breaking down even more. So let's add a little water. I'd say I'm probably adding not more than a gallon on this go round. But the important part is we're not adding any more nitrogen. We have our combination of greens and browns. And now we're just making sure we have enough moisture and oxygen for the microbes to do their work. So the process of turning a pile doesn't take quite as long as the process of building a pile. You can see a difference in the different leaves that I got. Some are willow oak, some are maple, and there's probably some red bud in there. You don't really see the coffee grounds anymore. And yes, you can see as I toss it, the 2-inch by 4-inch opening, stuff wants to spill out the sides. So I tend to use the 2-inch by 4-inch for the initial bin, but I also wanted to show you that. And since I started all my bins with this material, I have others that I took the bin and added chicken wire around it. I have another set that I added some of the plastic netting with 1-inch square openings. And yeah, I can feel the heat. And it has a nice earthy smell. It does not stink. It's a smell that any gardener would love. So my goal this winter is to turn at least once a week so that my compost will be finished sooner. On the other hand, I also start 8 to 10 bins every winter, and at some point you end up turning 3 or 4 in one day, and that's a bit of a workout. And I'm sure you can hear a leaf blower in the background, so somebody else is, I hope they're making compost too. There's a big clump. And we'll give that a little more water, not a lot. also say, I don't know if you noticed to the side, but because there was some grass here, we're close to an easement, but I put cardboard down to set the bins on top. It just makes the cleanup in the spring a little bit easier. But every now and then I stick the fork in and I catch on the cardboard. Stir that around a little bit. Break that apart. Yeah. The heat actually feels nice, because along with it comes a really lovely aroma. So we're back to where it had compressed, and I still have some to add back in. So it may not be completely full, but it will be fuller than when we started, and that's just from fluffing it up and putting some air back in there. And again, the air and the additional water are for the microbes. They need to breathe, and their major form of moving is via the water. They don't travel far. So what I often do is, you know, that bin was here, it moved there, but to turn it, I'll set another bin here to start. And then when I turn that one, I move it down a little bit, and this one will move down. Then I can put a third bin here and start. Now, if you're only doing 1 or 2 bins, for instance, if you're only doing 1 bin, you start it here, you turn it here, you turn it back here, and all you need is about 6 feet of space to do that. So you need however many bins plus 1. If you have 2 bins, you really need space for 3 to do that turn right this time, turn left the next time. So it really doesn't take a lot of space to do some hot composting. And every time you turn, the pile will get a bit shorter. And by the time you get to about the 4th turn, you'll find you'll be putting 2 bins together into one. You always want to keep a nearly full bin to keep that microbial activity going. So if you've got 2 bins that are half full, put those 2 together and make 1 full one. And then the hardest part is always getting the last little bit. And I'm almost there, but not quite. And again, because this is 2" by 4" and the material has been so dry this fall, I've got a little leakage out the sides, but guess what? That's good for the soil around the bins. And then I really do want to come over here on this side and clean up some of the spillage and get it back in the bin, but not my bricks. So I've been cleaning up a little bit of spillage around here, and I mentioned, you know, if you end up with a bin, 2 bins that are half full, put those 2 together. Now here's the thing you want to resist. This bin, we're back to being 4 inches from the top. The temptation is to put more new material in here. Please resist that temptation, because it will take longer for the new material to break down. And as you turn, you'll have this layer of less finished stuff. So try and keep it consistent. And the place that you would start to top off is when you have a couple of partial bins and you really need to get it back pretty full. So let me give this one last shot of some water. And then we'll put the lid back on. And this was the lid that came out of there. So it goes in pretty easily. And we put 4 inches of air back into this pile, so the microbes should be happy. We gave them a little more water. And the other thing is, I'm going to, the good compost thermometers can be left in the pile. So I like to do that. I'm just going to stick this back in the side. And of course the temperature has dropped because we've added water, which is cooler, and we've put some ambient air back in that is maybe 65 or 70 degrees. So it's probably not 145 anymore, but I'll bet tomorrow it is. So on my card where I track when I started it, how fast it got hot, I also put today's date, 11/15. I turned it at 145 degrees. And my goal is to get at least 4 turns. I'd really like 6 before I consider it finished compost. But I just clip that on to the side. It's going to be out in the weather, so it's a panel from a milk carton, which is accustomed to being wet. Use a really good fat Sharpie. Your fine point Sharpie will wash off, but that's how I track when I started it, how quickly it got hot, when did I turn it, and so I will then watch it, and as it sinks down again, in 5 to 7 days, I'll give it another turn. And of course, the bin that we made in the first video will be ready to turn about then too. In the meantime, I'll be starting more bins. You may not be doing as many as me, but you can use the same process as me. So that's what you do after you get the bin built and you've gotten it hot. And if you do this, by next spring you will have lovely finished compost like we showed you in video number 1 to use as a soil amendment in your veggie beds, in your ornamental beds. Some people even use it to top dress their lawn. So, thank you for joining us today. I hope you learned something about hot composting and you go out and put these leaves to good use and don't send them to the landfill.